I'll start. So my thesis starts with Galerie Mahfouz. Galerie Mahfouz was established in 1974. It belonged to my grandfather. I never knew the man. The only thing I knew of him was through my mother and my aunt. And my whole thesis built itself around the narrative that he developed to this building. So the idea was that his life was his success was his physical space, and the physical space became his reflection at one point. So the way that I've built out the narrative was by entering the abandoned building, currently exists along the Beirut Jbeil highway, as you're going to Tripoli. And the way that it played out was I started to build this narrative, and what you find out is that over time, he faced a financial crisis. He had to start selling the building away. When that happened, the disruption to the building and selling that off in parts caused him to have a stroke, and he eventually died because of it. So what I found was a deep-rooted entanglement between a man and space that raised the thesis question for me that was, who is really the host, man or space? And what does it mean to integrate that into a design process? How do you approach a building knowing that that's all it held before it? And so I went into a methodology where I went through a series of hand drawings where I allowed the anecdotes to map out space by space. So where it came to when I would start to give human characteristics to something inanimate, which was the building. So I started to give names to these drawings where I would think of him in his profile. I draw the building itself, where he appropriated the top home of the gallery to become his home, so he left home, and what he builds beneath his home is an illegal factory. So suddenly what I get is that hybrid drawings where a man entangled three spaces together all at once. This then triggered when I needed to shift in order to intervene on the building itself, I knew that the design process was going to happen inside out. And I also understood for me to apply this host question, I needed to understand it at a more extensive, less intimate scale. And this is when I wanted to kind of push the concept enough where strategically on site, it's a triangular site. That's the building, actually, you can see it here. So that's the building, it's abandoned. Currently, it's along the Jbeil highway. And actually one face is facing the highway and the other face faces the seaside road. It's a very strategic point and it's quite intimidating along the highway. And so I ended up formulating new hybrids, and I knew that my next step was to develop a hybrid program within the space itself. And this is where this idea of who's the host and servicing to be serviced kicked in, where any user that enters the space has to reassess his role in that space. This is where I proposed a hybrid program of a bank and a hotel. A bank on one phase gaining the exposure from the highway where someone has to actually contribute to become part of it, and the other phase, a hotel with that level of occupancy that he brought in to begin with. And so I developed a design where an occupied bank takes place, and the complexity that develops from the hybrids dictated for me what happens inside that space. So where their lobbies actually intersect, and what happens is I designed, for example, I'll give you an example of what happens inside. There's a 5-meter high panel between the first and second floor that drops down at night, because at night the bank shuts down and you have to have a locking scheme. When that happens, that panel is made of an opaque glass, let's say. And between that glass there's a hotel room and a double height space for the offices. So when that panel descends, you're actually gaining a view into the hotel room, but that only happens because of the program. So it's about who really owns the space, who owns the right. And in the plans, I'm not sure if you can tell much, but I sunk the entrance into I wanted to...
That's the end product.
Yeah, yes. And what I had done was I wanted to delay entrance into each space because I wanted to delay identity understanding. I wanted you to find out what space you're in. And so you actually enter, based on the triangular site, you enter the hotel on one end and the bank on another. And when you enter the hotel, what you would see is actually, because the bank is sunken, you see a courtyard, a sunken courtyard, and the hotel automatically thinks it belongs to them. And to access that courtyard, you have to walk through the bank. So you're faced by tellers all of a sudden, and the ATM is in the lobby of the hotel because it's a 24/7 lobby anyways. And then I've developed kind of cynical cores where interfaces start to happen. So if someone wanted to expand the space of their hotel room, they have to apply pushing force. And this is where my intervention on the elevation happens. My design process was inside out, not outside in. So the developing phase I'm in now is me creating surgical incisions from those rooms, for example, that actually create a shifting elevation.
I'm just going to try to see.
Yeah, you can, the sections I think show a lot more.
Only 5 minutes past.
I think I'm done.
So just maybe if you want to talk about 1 or 2 drawings.
There's 2 more minutes. So these hybrids, there are programmatic hybrids and hybrids that finalize and kind of show the entanglement between man and space. That's why in some of these hybrids you see kind of personal components. Everything on his desk was mapped out the way it was mapped out. It was located, and the idea of the lens was that to paint a picture of the man a bit better was the idea that didn't matter that you looked at it, didn't matter how you looked at him, it was that you were looking at him. And that played a role on how you see the building itself. So when I came to intervene, I knew that the complexity of the entanglement had to coexist. And that's why the idea of the panel, a hanging garden over the offices that becomes a garden for the hotel room based on when you can see the office and when you can't. And how that, now my next stage, for example, in that section and that one, is you see a movement onto the facade. So I'm actually shape-shifting my elevation inside out. So that in my addition and my intervention, I kind of remodeled the approach to designing an existing site without going outside in. I think that organizes
Totally reconfigured.
Yes, based on the past life. And those are exploded axonometrics of the building, so you can see what the building is like now, before its intervention. And they continue some sections along the back. Yeah? Thank you. To move away from the intimacy and tell myself I'm an architect, I'm intervening, and I'm going to do it the way I want it. If I wanted to realize it, I want it to be done this way. So I really wanted to push it. No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.